Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everybody, my name is Mayang Sita Dewi from Conflict Resolution in Islamic World Class G, and I'm here to tell you briefly about the EU's role in resolving Syrian war refugee problem. Without any further ado, let's get started. So first, we're going to discuss about the background of non-international armed conflict Syrian civil war. The beginning of the Syrian conflict began when the unrest on the protesters of the people in Syria spread, and then the crackdown intensified. Then, the opposition supporters raised their weapons to defend themselves and then to expel the security forces from their area. Assad pledged to crush foreign-backed terrorism and tighten control of the state. Violence then escalated rapidly and the country plunged into civil war, as well as the start of serious war as hundreds of rebel brigades were formed to fight government forces. The war between the government and the demonstrators has raised concern within the government that the rebels have caused chaos or an act that has been seen as the embodiment of the Arab Spring, which the Syrian government does not want to happen and has decided to fight the protesters by labeling them terrorists to anyone who would otherwise support the Syrian government. The wave of democratization in Syria that has occurred since 2011 has led to the flow of refugees from the Syrian region to Europe. The European Union or EU has made it a destination for refugees from Syria due to several things. First, due to geographical proximity. Second, the area is only limited by the Mediterranean Sea, so that by boat, the refugees can reach Europe's four regions. Besides that, a good economy is also a reason why the EU was chosen as a destination for Syrian refugees. So next, we're going to talk about the history and the use of the Convention on Refugees in Europe. The 1951 Convention on Refugees has resulted in very different applications in Europe. Some of the legal and social categories that appear may vary from country to country, and even the rights also vary. The Refugee Convention grants refugee status under the Geneva Conventions of 1951. They are divided into two groups. First, there is a quota of refugees taken as a group and under a specific programs or plans. Second, there are spontaneous refugees arriving in Europe of their own volition and making asylum applications according to national procedures. The Geneva Conventions of 1951 established an obligation for the state to grant status to refugees and make a number of recommendations on work and welfare that includes distributions, housing, education, public assistance, and all aspects of health and social security. So next is the European countries' treatment of Syrian refugees. There are many countries with various treatments, but here we're just going to discuss about two countries. The first country is Germany. Germany became the main destination for refugees because German citizens and governments accept refugees with open arms, despite the neo-Nazi attack incident. Germany has won worldwide praise amid an assessment of how quickly European values are collapsing under the pressure of the refugee crisis. The German Chancellor gave no room at all to extreme right actions against the presence of refugees and political asylum seekers. Accepting refugees is important to show solidarity with those facing persecution and war. For conservatives, accepting refugees also has pragmatic benefits. Germany is an aging society with a smaller population and may benefit from the flow of young, talented, and highly motivated workers from the refugees of Syria. The second country is Greece. As a part of the EU, Greece should implement CEAS values that the EU refers to in dealing with the refugees issues. The EU itself has done some of the value contained in CEAS in dealing with the Syrian refugee issue. The EU has donated financial aid to the refugees. Already 1.9 billion euros has been deployed by the EU to Syria and its neighbors from both the Commission's and the combined funds of EU member states to deal with the impact of the conflict in Syria, including the refugee issue. However, for the second point, which is the granting of temporary protection, some EU countries still have not implemented this arrangement, especially Greece. There are several domestic reasons that have led Greece to refuse and even expel refugees from Syria. First, the steady flow of Syrian refugees has left refugee camps overcrowded while Greece itself is unable to handle the asylum process smoothly. Second, the economic crisis that has plagued Greece since 2008. The crisis is also a reason for the EU to clarify the rejection of Syrian refugees in Greece. Third, Greece considers Syrian refugees to have mostly infectious disease that could harm the Greek population itself. Next, we're going to talk about three of the EU's policies on Syrian refugees. The first policy is the Common European Asylum Systems, or CEAS. CEAS is the standard for EU countries when EU countries face refugee problems. The establishment of CEAS is one of the implementations of human rights values that are concerned to the EU member states as a whole. In 1999, the EU worked to establish a legislative framework for the handling of the refugee issues that CEAS later established based on Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, which stated that there were rights for refugees to avoid violence from other countries. The arrangement of the refugee issues then from 1999 to 2005 resulted in several provisions in the handling of the refugee problem. Arrangements on financial solidarity resulted in the European Refugee Fund, then refugee protections in the Temporary Protection Directive and the Family Reunification Directive. The second policy is the European Asylum Support Office, or EASO. The organization was formed to protect and deal with the refugee problem in the European region. The uneven number of refugees in each European country becomes the work of EASO. EASO works with countries of origin and third countries to relocate refugees. This is done so that refugees get the right treatment. In addition, the financial problems of the receiving country make the reason for the relocation of refugees. EASO exists in Italy and Greece. One of the things EASO has done is relocating. EASO's relocations aim to level the number of refugees so that refugees can have a decent livelihood. The EASO shelter camp also provided training to refugees and legal assistance. The third policy is the European Neighbourhood Policy, or ENP. To address the impact of Middle Eastern refugees, the European Union, as the highest institution in the European region, issued a European Neighbourhood Policy. The ENP policy is intended to help the EU's neighbours achieve prosperity. The measures demonstrate European support for the Middle East to take a transitional path and reform process. This was done by the European Union to limit the entry of refugees into the European region after the Arab Spring. In the ENP program, not only strengthen cooperations in the political and economic fields, but it is also to provide direct funds to these countries to improve the condition of their countries. Next, we're going to discuss about the ways of EU in handling of refugee funds. The first way is the Common European Asylum Systems, or CEAS, functions. The Dublin Regulations adds to the inclusion of the territory of the countries that are the outer borders of the European Union. The above systems of accountability makes it possible to increase the burden of cases of member states that have a longer history of immigrations and colonialism. Any allocation system used may have an impact on some member states rather than non-member states. In addition, only about 9% of current asylum claims come under Dublin's regulations, and the system does not protect member states from an increasingly varied wave of refugees over time. Therefore, the challenge of achieving greater division of responsibility poses a wider problem than simply reform or replacement of the Dublin system. Sharing responsibilities can be seen in two aspects, financial and administrative. The more responsibilities about administrative divided, the easier will be also to share responsibilities in terms of finances. Next is the way of sharing refugee handling costs. The European Refugee Fund and other sources provide financial assistance to member states for refugee recipient states and their prosecution process. The European Council of Refugees and Exiles, or ECRE, have previously called for the sharing financial responsibility. A thorough approach to reimbursement will be provided for member states to calculate and report their expenses. It may be easier to provide a set amount per asylum claim. The European Asylum Support Office should carefully calculate these subsidies. Then, the next way is to sharing resources and work. Reimbursements incurred by refugee receiving countries are applied for some cost. For example, settlements or allowance for other living expenses. Some other costs are harder to quantify. For example, public government sources are used to register claims, provide information to asylum seekers and officials, schedule and conduct hearings, and guarantee the education of minors while in the time between filing their claims and resolving their cases. Some of these activities can be carried out through common mechanism or with member states cooperating with each other. The best combination of reimbursement of responsibilities of member states on the one hand and direct collaboration is founding on the other hand and can be found through the gradual process of policy development and implementations. To conclude, the EU has a minimum standard that must be met for refugees called the CEAS. Not only to address within Europe, but also to reduce the number of refugees, the EU also implements the ENP, a policy that is intended to help EU neighboring countries achieve prosperity. Measuring in showing European support for Middle Eastern countries to take a path of transition and reform. Some countries have been quite good at handling the Syrian refugee crisis, but there are countries that are not very open to accepting refugees. Many European countries are less welcoming to Middle Eastern or Syrian refugees. However, this is not entirely their fault. The economic crisis and underfunding also left them unable to do much for the Syrian refugees. Well, that is all from me. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully the knowledge we learned recently can be useful. And don't forget to like this video. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.